Welcome back. We're still here in the Rumble DC studios. You are live for our 32nd annual Phyllis Schlafly Collegians Summit. It's something that, again, Phyllis Schlafly kept rolling for a number of years. We've continued that in honor of her legacy and also a lot of the work that we have left to do. We're glad that you're here with us. I'll remind you, phyllisschlafly.com is the home base for that throughout the evening, and then throughout also our great guests. We'll make sure and point you to them as well. And next up with us, we actually have joining remote Mr. Auron MacIntyre. You probably know him from the Auron MacIntyre Show. He's over on the Blaze Media. He's got tons of breaking down political and cultural events. Always a great perspective to have. Also, not just a columnist and a writer, he's the author of a book last year, 2024, The Total State, How Liberal Democracies Became Tyrannies. And he showcases the way liberal democracies morph into tyrannies, which, my goodness, I don't know what more of a conversation we could have than that, but we've got a lot of things going on. So here in the studio, again, Ryan Haidt and Mason Mohan, and joining us remote, Auron MacIntyre. Auron, thanks for being with us. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Glad you could be here and give us some perspective. So let me just start with this, because we both got a page full of questions here to go for a discussion for the next few minutes. But where did you get started? I know this, but I'd love for folks to hear this. Where you got started? Where did you start filming videos and podcasting, and then the Blaze, and then the author? Where'd that start for you?
Sure. I'd always been interested in politics. I went to school for political science, but there aren't a lot of jobs in it. And so I ended up teaching, and I was a journalist for a number of years, just locally doing politics and crime. And when I went back to teaching, we saw everything that happened in 2020. And I, like a lot of people, had started to wonder about our political system with Trump in 2016, the way that the media was handling things. Getting to see behind the media curtain a little bit really told me that the perception was shaping a lot more than the political reality of what was going on in the country. But then when the pandemic really hit and we locked everything down, and it seemed like the Constitution just wasn't doing anything, like the churches were closed, we were locked in our homes, people were talking about forcing people to get experimental vaccines, and just nobody was doing anything. And this really shook me to my core, because all the stuff I had believed as a conservative about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and how this was going to safeguard everything kind of blew me away. And so I needed to understand what was going on. And that's when I started reading a lot more political theory and writing and putting together videos, because I wanted to kind of take people on that journey of trying to understand what was happening. And it just kind of snowballed from there, and I ended up on the Blaze like I am now.
That's awesome. And I think, honestly, that replicates a lot of people's stories of 2020, really activated them. And whether it was the political climate or the COVID and healthcare climate, I think that's a hallmark moment for a lot of people now who would identify themselves as being on the right wing. But this is where we'll dive off here. You know, your perspective always comes back to a lot of the historical implications, the Constitution, where we started, and it's not just the political moment we're in now. You know, Trump 2016 or 2020, which I think did a lot of people. That's where, you know, it kind of motivated them into the political side. But for you, a lot of it comes back to, well, hold on, we're a constitutional republic, or we're a constitutional republic. That's how we were founded. So how does all of this measure up against that? So I mean, really, that kind of dives us in. You know, you encapsulated a lot of this in your book, The Total State. And I mean, what would you say? Did the United States start as a constitutional republic and then shifted over to a liberal democracy, which what we've become, what we're seeing the result of? How would you describe, and when would you describe that major shift as having taken place?
So the thing that is, I think, unfortunate about deifying the Constitution in the way that we have is we start to ignore historical realities. I think that we should recognize that the cycle of regimes is something that is so old that you can read about it in Plato and Aristotle. This is just a classic understanding of how nations mature over time. And so no regime is eternal. No one understanding of how a people will live or a country will be governed is going to last forever. But because in the United States, we kind of abandoned our other senses of identity, both religious and as a people, and kind of went all in on this idea of like a completely propositional nation constructed by a document, we come up with this idea that the document, as long as it exists, therefore means that the government will be the same no matter what. And the truth is that the government, the document itself, is a reflection of the people and the way that they live their lives, not the other way around. The document doesn't make the people make the document. And so we did begin as a constitutional republic. That is absolutely the way the United States was designed to operate. However, just like every nation throughout history, we grew and we changed. And one of the things I try to lay out in the book, and I've been trying to hammer home, is that republics, by their necessity, have limitations. Again, this is in literature all the way from Aristotle to Machiavelli to our own founding fathers, who were, obviously heavily influenced by both. And they both point out that ultimately, if you continue to scale, if you continue to grow, if you have an imperial republic, that will necessarily change the type of government you have, because the need to expand that government, to grow it, to have it constantly control more and more, will pull it away from its original existence as a republic. And so one of the problems that we're facing now is we're slowly starting to realize that we walked very far away from the Constitution, and we don't know how to go back, because we want to maintain kind of a global empire while also keeping our identity as a self-governed constitutional republic. And we're slowly coming to the realization that it's difficult to maintain both.
Awesome. Yeah, and as we kind of morph into this post-liberal democracy, you describe us going into a tyranny, and there's this really interesting idea of anarcho-tyranny, which I know that you've mentioned and written about, and I think it comes from Sam Francis, but this idea that there's we talk about double standards a lot these days, especially in the justice system and the way that things are prosecuted differently. But I think 2020, aside from COVID, really showed that with with the Black Lives Matter protests that ravaged the whole country. And meanwhile, most people weren't able to go to funerals of their loved ones. They weren't able to go to church, but then people could go protest throughout every city. And that was actually, so I was wondering if you could talk about this idea of anarcho-tyranny, where, some people have total freedom to do whatever they want, this anarchic situation, whereas others are undergoing tyrannical rules and unable to operate in any way.
So, like you said, Sam Francis came up with this term, anarcho-tyranny. And the core of anarcho-tyranny is when the government is giving preferential treatment to the people it can't control and is exerting additional control on those which it can. So one of the dynamics you get as your elites separate from the interests of the people is they start welcoming in other peoples to replace those that they no longer want to govern. And when they do that, they are usually bringing in an underclass that is dependent on them. They're bringing in people who are going to rely on them for handouts and benefits, for their social standing, because that, as a politician, makes you more powerful. If you have established people, a true middle class that has its own property, its own civic organizations, its churches, its families, they're far less likely to let you do whatever you want to do. But if you have people who are very dependent on you for everything, they're more likely to simply take what you give them and kind of just support you no matter what. As this dynamic rolls out, it becomes more and more in the favor of the elites to punish the middle class, punish the established people who have these natural bonds, these natural ties, this ability to push back against government control. It behooves them to start punishing them, and simultaneously they give their kind of their foot soldiers, the people they imported in order to become more powerful, they give them more and more carte blanche, because they are it's like a pressure release valve that allows them, you kind of let them raid the countryside for a little bit to satiate what they want. It has a dual purpose. It cows the middle class, it terrifies the middle class, and it empowers your supporters simultaneously. And so you get this dynamic of anarcho-tyranny where the law exists, but it really only applies to those that would follow the law in the first place, which tend to be the middle class, the more natural inhabitants of the country, the people who are established. Those are the only people who follow the rules. The underclass is more likely to not care. They can violate the law and they won't be punished. One, because they're clients of the regime, but also because they're more likely to be dangerous if they are punished, right? We have this entire kind of edifice, intellectual edifice about how any kind of punishment of a minority or any of these things is de facto racism, and that's the most evil thing that could happen in the world. And so there's political, there's logistical, and there's moral incentives to structure your society this way. Once again, the elites have separated themselves from the interests of that middle class, that core group of Americans. And I think that's why we've seen the anarcho tyranny ramp up more and more and more, because that dynamic of unrooted, unmoored elites relying on the underclass they've imported has become more and more stark.
And I think we kind of see wokeness or progressivism as the glue or the ideological dressing that kind of holds this together. But going forward, 2020 was 5 years ago. It seems like that doesn't exactly work the same way it's supposed to. A few weeks ago, you wrote about Pride Month, June Pride Month, which back in 2020 and 21, that was it was hard to get away. But this month, it didn't seem like they were bashing us over the head with it as much. It was kind of easy to forget that was happening. And I'm wondering, because you've had this a running dialogue with a few people about the state of wokeness and whether it's going to ramp up or whether it's going to go away. And I was wondering if you could talk about whether or not wokeness or progressivism still has the same teeth that it used to, whether it comes to the way that government policy is structured or the way that people can be canceled and pushed out of organizations and lose their livelihood.
It's become a really interesting dynamic because obviously, previously wokeness was mainly racial, right? Like this was the racial groups were the ones that were highlighted in the oppressor press narrative, that kind of thing. But when the sexual groups received their purchase inside everything, we started to see a shift in wokeness to be more about that identity, right? It's more about embracing this decadent sexual identity and normalizing it. That's why the pride parades got pushed to the front, that kind of thing. Well, it turns out actually Americans might sit around and for racial lectures, but when you start cutting the genitals off their kids, they actually do stand up. And so the left was quickly recognizing that the same accelerating, browbeating dynamic that was working for them racially was not working for them sexually. They had overplayed their hand in this arena. And because they have trained so many of their people to be true believers, even though there were people who recognized that this was going too far, was getting out of hand, said maybe we should dial it back, they were mainly being pushed to the side. They were mainly being pushed out of the discussion, and everything was ramping up to the point where it was very clear that the excessive, just abusive, child predatory type activity that was being pushed on the left was completely destroying their brand. Now, I don't think there was a conscious pivot. I think that there's still a lot of people who are pushing that direction. But what we are seeing is that wokeness is morphing back into something racialist. And actually, more specifically, it is becoming third worldist. A lot of people predicted that the left would pivot back to economic issues instead of the woke stuff. But they actually haven't really been able to do that. Bernie Sanders and his ilk have more or less been, they're not particularly powerful inside the party anymore. And so what we're seeing is now with this, New York mayor candidate, the elevation of a guy who's both pro-trans and quoting Marx. But the most important thing about him is that he hates white people, right? And this is actually what the core of the coalition, if we're honest, has been for a long time. It's been about deconstructing white Christian culture. That's really been the true center. How do you get a radical Muslim, a radical religious Muslim, and a trans person on the same side? Well, because they hate one thing, right? Their ideology doesn't actually overlap, but they will build a coalition around this. And so I think that we're just seeing a naked pivot to this, which in some ways is super ugly and dangerous, but in other ways kind of puts the cards on the table for people, right? We don't have to, is it all Marxism? Well, some of it's Marxism. Is all of it, gay pride? Well, some of it's gay pride. But at the end of the day, the one thing that all of these groups have is that they don't like white Christian society. And so that seems to be where they've settled. And at this point, the left is surprisingly comfortable with embracing third worldist ideology, I think, as the core of wokeness.
Well, and Oren, to tack on to that, and I'm not going to rehash it, folks. If you want to see the whole rehashing, you can go and just hit up X and search for Auron MacIntyre and James Lindsay, and you'll see a lot of reading that you have to do. But to the point of that conversation and to a lot of the others, the right is making a little bit of a pivot now. And I would say the pro-Western civilization defenders are coming back to the forefront of the discussion. And of course, that's being met not just by the left, but also by folks on the right with some, well, with a little bit of chagrin and quite a bit of resistance. What would you say? I'm kind of curious if you could encapsulate that for us, for those of us who are making that shift, where it's really about a value system and it's about the values that built Western civilization as we're trying to rebuild. Again, our theme for this year's Collegians is building America's golden age. As we are looking back to what made this nation, to what made Western civilization great, how do you recommend we continue to march forward, preaching those values, talking about them, and not allow ourselves to be pigeonholed? I know we know how to fight the left, but not allow ourselves to be pigeonholed by folks on the right who are resistant and wanting to stay muck and mired into, I don't know what it is, the 20th century version of conservatism that hasn't really gotten us anywhere. How do we effectively move forward in that with the right-wing opposition we have?
Well, I think a lot of this from people on the right. You can't see me doing the air quotes right now, but
we heard them.
We heard them. Yeah, a lot of people on the right were on the left 10 minutes ago, and almost everyone. I really have a hard time thinking of people who have been right wing their whole lives and suddenly find a problem with the current direction of the right. It's almost exclusively the "I didn't leave the left left me" types coming over and saying, oh, well, I didn't like this certain amount of wokeness, but now that I think it's over, I will dictate to you how you're going to run your movement. And to be fair, this is not new, that we have a word for this. It's called a neoconservative. That word has become many things to many people. A lot of people now associated with war and all these things. But its most basic definition, it's a new conservative. It's somebody who was not conservative, but they shifted their viewpoint. The thing is that most of them didn't actually shift their viewpoint. They really just want a place where they can be 1990s Bill Clinton liberals. And that's what a lot of people like James Lindsay want to do. They want to make conservatism safe 1990s liberalism. Now, I think when we're talking about where the right is going, we're starting to recognize, as we discuss the desperate need to end illegal immigration, we have to start articulating why, right? And we can point to statistics and all these things, crime and economics and the costs and everything else involved. But at the end of the day, we all know there's kind of a moral argument behind why we need to stop mass immigration. And one of the reasons, and this is why I think, Elon Musk with his America Party and these things are so short-sighted, is that the way we want to live our lives, the principles that you guys are talking about that we want to forward, they came from somewhere. They're not disembodied. They're not just this free-floating thing in the air. They came from the way that our ancestors lived their lives. They came from traditions. They came from the beliefs. They came from Christianity. They came from Europe. And specifically, they came from Anglo-Americans. This is how we built the United States. And I think, when we're asking the question, Matt Walsh got a lot of traction, and rightly so, by doing a very funny movie called What is a Woman, right? Because a basic answer that the left couldn't give. Well, the new question is, what is an American? Right. And Samuel Huntington, Clash of Civilizations, famous author, not a man of the right. He's a center leftist, worked at Harvard his whole life. Right. But he wrote a book called Who Are We? And the whole point of this book was that, look, the bipolar understanding of human identity that existed during the Cold War of communist or not communist is done. And after that, we're going to have to struggle with non-ideological identities again. We're going to have to return to more organic identities and not just these purely, supra identities that conquered the globe. And his point was, for America, and again, guy of the center left, this is not some hard right guy, this is not some right-wing radical. He said, America is, at its essence, an Anglo-Protestant nation. It was built on English law and custom and Christian values. This is who we are as a people. Now, being a man of the left, he said, of course, other people can come in. They can join that. They can become a part of it. You don't have to just be Anglos or even just have to be Christian, but you have to understand this is the core of your identity. You have to understand that this is where your values come from. And if you get rid of all of the people who held those values, you also get rid of the values. And so when we have discussions about values and principles, those are, of course, critical. But when we completely disembody them from the people they came from, then we start to have difficult times understanding why something like mass immigration is wrong. When you recognize that, like, ethnically cleansing the United States of its inhabitants so you can drive down wages for corporations will also get rid of the very values like limited government, then you recognize that actually changing the population has serious consequences for the values too. They're not separate. And that scares, James Lindsay liberals, because they want to believe in the 1990s version of, Bill Clinton, liberalism. But that just won't hold. We can't continue to operate our society that way and believe we're going to hold on to the values that we purport to share.
And this is so exciting to me because as someone who's worked in and been around the political scene for a long time, one of the big questions that's plagued us as the real authentic conservative folks on the right inside the Republican Party is, man, Republicans are terrible at making emotional, moral arguments. It's always been about numbers and statistics. And even if we're right, that doesn't mean that people are listening to you. Now we really have a very compelling, authentic opportunity to talk about something that matters. It's not just numbers. Case in point, what you said, illegal immigration. It's not just numbers. It's not just, because we have to obey the law. No, why? Why do we have to obey the law? Where does it come from? Why does that matter to us as a people? Now we get to make some big identifying, moral and emotionally charged arguments. And I mean that in a good way. It's a real golden opportunity that we have to do that right now. How would you say in the era of Trump, with what they're doing, with how it's going? I know obviously we only have 3.5, really 1.5 years left of the current status quo before it changes, before the midterms or another presidential election. What trajectory are we on with this? Are you happy with where we're going? What grade, I guess, would you give where we are? And then what more do we need to do to encourage the Trump folks and Congress to move the right direction? And, basically, how are we doing and where do we keep going?
Well, it's been an interesting week to evaluate that. The Trump admin has been having a pretty difficult week this week. And so it's an interesting time to have that discussion. I would say that we're making progress. Obviously, and I don't think that Trump gets enough credit for this. The border went from letting in 8 to 10 million people during the Biden administration to functionally being closed under Donald Trump. That's a huge win. Like, no matter how you feel about Trump, no matter how you feel about what else he's doing, that's a massive sea change. That literally, excuse me. Yeah, that's why I'm not on camera, so you guys don't have to see me hacking up along. But it's a huge change, right? It's at the very least a pause button on the destruction of our country. And so for that, we should be absolutely grateful. We've seen some positive moves when it comes to mass deportations. It was always going to be a step-up procedure, right? We always knew, at least anyone who wasn't an idiot knew, that you can't immediately just scoop 30 million people out of the country and toss them somewhere else. You had to have the infrastructure. You had to go through all the legal challenges. And the Trump administration was smart to remove the most dangerous people first. That's the easiest argument to make. I mean, the left looked like idiots, right? Like the only issue that they could stand on to battle with Trump after everything was fighting to get some gang member who beats his wife back into the country. That was who they were championing. So optically, it was great. If you look at all the polls when it comes to mass deportations, the public supports them by an overwhelming percentage. So in many ways, there's victories. At the same time, Trump keeps talking about the possibility of amnesty for farm workers and hospitality workers. That we've had some difficulty possibly extracting ourselves from foreign conflicts, be it Iran, or he just said something about Ukraine and the need to send weapons to them again. And so it's extremely a mixed bag, and this is always the case with Trump. He says a lot of stuff simultaneously, right? And this is how he scrambles the left constantly. This is why he's so difficult for the left to deal with. But it also makes it difficult to know as supporters where we're at necessarily. I think that we have a good start from the Trump administration, but I think that if we don't see them follow through, you have a full military style budget for ICE now, we need to start seeing hundreds of thousands of people out of this country, millions of people out of this country. If we are moving down that path, then I think it's an overall win. if we get stuck in the mire, if it gets delayed and delayed and delayed, and we hit the midterms and nothing significant on that front has happened, and we're still trying to sift people out of the deep state and get basic appointments done and those kind of things, then I start to worry about where the administration is going. So I think there was a really strong start. I think we've seen a little bit of a fumble of the football here over the last little bit. I'm really hoping they can recover and get things back on track.
Well, I do want to touch on something that you just mentioned, because if we look at the history of the GOP over the last few decades, it was the party of the Bushes and John McCain, and let's get into more wars. Let's do more wars. We got to fight the war on terror. But you wrote a few weeks ago, I think, about how the right became anti-war, and we really saw that with in the last few weeks with the Iran and what happened there. And you really saw the whole these conservatives in the last 10 seconds come out of the woodwork, all these people that were supposedly diehard Trump supporters for the last 10 years that are like, and yes, we support him with these foreign entanglements. But we also saw a very strong reaction from people like us who said, wait, this isn't why we voted for Trump. We didn't want to be involved in more of these foreign wars. That was a big appealing thing about Trump for us, but now we're bombing Iran. How did we go through this transition where the right and a lot of Republicans are no longer the party of war, but rather the party of peace? And on top of that, why is that not really going into practice as much as we would like to see with what happened with Iran, of course, and the continuing conflict in Ukraine?
Well, I think that for the most part, the right got Ukraine correct. We had a bunch of, rah-rah from Fox News and a few commentators early on, but it quickly became apparent, especially with the way the Democrats handled that war, that it was going to be used to attack Republicans and anyone who might have questions about what was going on. And very quickly, even if some of the most prominent commentators and Fox News and such were pushing it, in general, the people were not, the right was not for this, and the commentary quickly caught up, and people soured on the Ukrainian war very quickly. Unfortunately, people in the United States have a very, have been kind of conditioned to have a very different response to Israel. And so when Israel's in trouble or some kind of danger or something is happening, then kind of all the lessons they learned with Ukraine kind of got undone with Israel. And so a lot of people who otherwise were on the right track kind of knee-jerk returned, I think, to that response. The very delicate thing that has to kind of happen going forward is for the United States to disentangle itself from this idea of being the world's policeman. And we kind of got it with Ukraine, but because Israel is like this sensitive pressure point in American foreign policy and even domestic policy, we kind of reflexively returned to that the minute that we hit that pressure point. It's going to be a slow process, but the thing is America first, right? The real important foundation of this understanding is that we put the interest of the United States first all the time. Now, that doesn't make us isolationists or pacifists. I don't think the American people really believe, are constitutionally anti-war in the sense of that is our guiding principle. I do think that they are reflexively America first. And I think that means returning to a foreign policy like George Washington extolled in his farewell address, that we are always putting the interest of our country first. Whenever possible, we're avoiding foreign entanglements. The wisdom contained in that document is immense, and he called out basically every dynamic that we would see if we gave some nation a favored status. He said it was going to hurt us, and it did. And so I think the big thing going forward is not to be anti-war necessarily or pacifist or any of these things, but is to always evaluate what is in America's interests. And I think if you keep that as your guiding light, then you will make wise choices and you will reduce the amount of foreign wars you're involved in, not because war is always evil or something you should unilaterally oppose, but because in general, the United States does not need to be involving itself in many of these wars, and it's doing so against its own interests. And remember, of course, it's the boys from Appalachia and Texas that are fighting these wars, right? It's not the sons of liberals. It's not the sons of East and West Coast blue elites. It's the sons of the South. It's the sons of Middle America. They're the ones that are really going to fight these wars. And so conservatives, I think, are recognizing slowly but surely that maybe that's not in the interests. Like the blood of their children is precious. And if it is to be spent, it should only be spent in protection of the United States of America and no one else.
Well, Auron, let me, in just our last very few minutes here, let me ask one more question and bring it, well, no, one more. We'll have a wrap-up question I think Mason will want to ask at the end here, but let me bring us back to a little bit further or earlier in the discussion, talking about, the fact that we are a constitutional republic, or we're a constitutional republic. When it comes to where we're going, we've obviously seen changes throughout our time. We began with the Articles of Confederation. Obviously, the founders came back pretty quickly, renewed that idea with a more powerful executive, a chief executive. We got the Constitution, which has been a gold standard, I believe, in history. But the reality is that good enough for where we are now? As we're fighting to throw off the deep state, to get ourselves unburied from the bureaucratic administrative nightmare, move forward into a new era of what it means to be an American, is returning to the Constitution, returning to that separation of powers and our three branches of government. Is that strong enough? Do you think that there's something further that's going to be needed to defeat the total state? I mean, if we're going to slide back into the democratic, the liberal democracy style that we've had the 20th century, that's not good. Can we really return to the Constitution and that'll do it? Or is there something further or different that is needed for this next era of returning to Americanism?
I don't, I've said this many times, I'm short on the American government, but I'm long on the American people, because the government is not the people, and their well-being is not one and the same. And so I think for the American government, something significant will change. I think that we cannot ever truly return to the Constitution. The only way out is through. However, we can carry those traditions and beliefs and values forward. Now, if we want to be a constitutional republic, and I don't think that's entirely impossible, but if we do, we must address the issue of scale. And that is something that is very difficult because all of these other powers, China, Russia, other significant powers, they want to have large centralized states, right? Like that is not a problem for them. But for us, if we want to live in the way that our founders intended, we cannot maintain that type of state and also expect to enjoy that level of freedom. And so our options are either to scale down drastically as a nation, or to embrace the fact that we will not be doing that and to find a way to honor the beliefs and the values of our founders while also embracing the fact that in the current system, the current paradigm, we have to find another way forward. I don't know which way it's going to break. I don't even know that we're going to make a conscious decision to do one or the other. I think a very likely outcome, which I outlined in my book, is that the regions of the country that are governed more functionally will draw people to them. We'll see a great sort. It's already happening in my state of Florida. A lot of people came here during COVID to be next to people they actually share values with so that they won't be, locked in their homes and forced to inject themselves with something. But as that dynamic evolves, we will probably see more and more regional governance, and that will allow the possibility of a return to a more Republican style, or at least a federated republic, which was the intention of the founders. Again, it's hard to predict in the crystal ball which way we're going to go, but it will be one of those two ways. There is no other path where we just maintain a global empire of a gigantic scale and also return to constitutional principles. There's a limit to the type of government our founders created. They knew this. This is not me bringing criticism. This is me pointing to the very tradition they were drawing on. They knew this fact about the type of government that they created. And we need to acknowledge that fact if we want to be able to function in the tradition that they placed us.
So to wrap up, we've got one last question. The theme for this year's Phyllis Schlafly Collegians is building America's golden age, based on what Trump said in his inauguration speech, that the golden age of America has begun. So that's our concern. Now it's time to do the work to build America's golden age. And we want to know, what is your top priority for the most important thing that needs to be done to build the golden age of America?
Well, at a macro level, I think it is deportations. I think in order to return to a stable society, one where we can build, brotherhood and shared values and culture, we have to have at the very least only the legal occupants of the country being involved and interested in the country. However, on I think a more practical and macro or micro level, something that the people watching this can actually do, I think it's critical to remember that as great as Trump might be or not be, he was never going to change the whole system by himself. It's not just a top-down problem. It's also a bottom-up problem. We cannot defeat the total state. We cannot return to a constitutional republic in any way, shape, or form if we are not virtuous. The core that our founders told us over and over again is that our Constitution can only govern a virtuous and religious people. And if you're neither virtuous nor religious, then the Constitution can't govern you. That's not my judgment. That's literally what the founders said. And so practically what we have to do is we have to better ourselves. We have to become worthy of leadership and governable by the Constitution by restoring that virtue. And we also have to build the local community organizations and infrastructures that will allow people to inculcate virtue, to cultivate virtue, and to rise to the occasion and become self-governing. And so I think it's really important to recognize that while Trump might be a pause button on the destruction of our country, it still falls to us. And that means we need to get more involved in our communities. We need to be building families. We need to be building institutions. You said building in your question, and that is the key word. We should be building all the time. That is the answer. We need alternatives. We need localization. That's what's going to allow us to, again, live in the mode of what our founders intended for us in the first place.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Hey, again, folks, Auron MacIntyre. Auron, you can find him on X at Auron MacIntyre, auronmacintyre.com. It's on the screen there, and go check him out on the Blaze as well. Thank you, Auron, so much for your time, for your thoughts, and we wish you all the best in your work and get better.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys suffering through my coughing fits, but thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Hey, folks, we'll be back in just a minute. We've got more Phyllis Schlafly Collegians 32 on the way right after a quick break.